probably good to wait probably a minute or two after the hour, just because.
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe even 5, actually, when I was looking at the recordings of past dialogues, that it took people a couple of minutes to settle in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we can. Welcome to our 6th CEM Dialogue of the Commission on Ecosystem Management. Today we will be talking about ecosystem governance. Ecosystem governance is one of the 6 priority areas that we have in our new CEM mandate. And the group started the work back in 2015 after we had the first World Forum on Ecosystem Governance in China, which led to the publication of the Beijing Declaration and the first paper that was published in 2017 in AMBIO under the leadership of Liette. And later we had the second forum that was held again in China in 2018. The thematic group has continued this work with the preparation and analysis of case studies and the need to develop common principles and promote interdisciplinary work. So today, the topic of the dialogue is developing principles for ecosystem governance to ensure net gain in biodiversity, ecosystem services, and human well-being. We have today, and we welcome Liette Vasseur, who is the thematic group leader of this group, together with Tomas Zulkin, who is the co-lead of this thematic area. So welcome, Liette, over to you.
Thank you very much. And Tomas, you'll be able to share the, perfect. Great. So thank you very much for all coming today. And yeah, so Tomas and I have been discussing since he became co-lead pretty much on the idea that we needed to start developing these principles so that it's a little bit easier to understand where we're going. And as Angela mentioned, how do we integrate that in terms of that it can help, especially when we look at nature-based solution, for example. So next slide. So as Angela mentioned, I'm the lead of the Ecosystem Governance Thematic Group, and I'm a professor at Brock University, as well as a UNESCO Chair on Community Sustainability. And Tomas is my co-lead, and he's currently a PhD, just started at the University of Groningen in Netherlands. And will be in big part working on this topic and going further in his PhD in terms of analysis of governance. Next slide. So today, the first thing we'll be talking about a little bit of the history of ecosystem governance, ecosystem governance versus environmental governance, and then we'll be really diving into the conceptualizing of ecosystem governance, explaining the research that was done, how from that it was possible to start developing the principles. So they are drafts. So this is why we want so much of the comments of everybody coming today, as well as some of the possible tools that can be used for that. And so therefore we'll have the Q&A at the end. Next. So just to briefly recap the history of ecosystem governance. In fact, the first attempts or work that was started was in the 1990s, and originally it was more related to water issues, not necessarily the full ecosystem, even if it was called ecosystem governance. And in fact, there was a one forum that was done in South Africa at the time. Then in 2000, it started to move more towards ecosystem services, but again, with no real definition and leading more in some way towards environmental governance. And as Angela mentioned, since the 2010s, we have been moving further with first mentioning and starting to discuss about it at the World Parks Congress in 2014, to have the first World Forum on Ecosystem Governance in 2015, which produced the Beijing Declaration. In between, as mentioned, we had also the publication and the development and publication of the paper in MBO, which was a collaborative effort of several members. And in 2016, at the World Conservation Congress in Hawaii, the Ecosystem Governance Thematic Group got established. Then in 2018, we had the second World Forum on Ecosystem Governance in China. We were supposed to gradually get one this year, but as you know, with the pandemic, it's a little bit complicated, and I'm not sure when we'll be able to have our next World Forum, hopefully within the next few years. So the thing is, that is important is to understand that the reflection on the perception of ecosystem governance within IUCN is shifting. And we needed to have really a proper definition and clear conceptual basis. And this is important, especially because governance is a very important component of nature-based solution, especially with criteria 4 and 5 and 6. Next. So I will leave very soon Thomas talking, but one thing that was clear, so in 2015, there was still a bit some, I would say, challenges in understanding ecosystem governance within versus environmental governance, and there was kind of a push to put it as a subset. Gradually, with our reflection and how it have evolved, we realized that environmental governance tend to be more predominantly focusing on nature and environmental, and it's more sectoral approach, versus ecosystem governance, which is both nature and people. And this is why it's probably more appropriate, especially when we look at the nature-based solution. Next. And Thomas, it's your turn.
Thank you, Liette, for wonderful introduction and for informing everyone how ecosystem governance came to be, especially within the IUCN setting. And now we will be moving towards the research that has been done over past 2 years, initiated in 2019, so 2 years ago, mainly from within our ecosystem governance thematic group. And what we, as Liette mentioned, what we wanted to find out is what actually is meaning of ecosystem governance for our members. And as it turned out, not only to our commission members. What we did was to do an online questionnaire that ran for 2 months, and we managed to get 93 valid responses and 75 non-anonymous ones, which is wonderful. That means that people want to be contacted further and want to engage. So I'm actually very happy that basically 75% of all our respondents are willing to get engaged further and more when it comes to developing the ecosystem governance theory. We were also lucky that we gathered responses from 37 different nationalities from all continents, which is wonderful. And from all age groups, as well as from people from all around the spectrum of expertise and occupation-wise. As you can see on the pie charts, we have broad representation of basically every field. And one important thing is, although ecosystem governance has been mainly developed from within the IUCN, so 22% of the respondents to our questionnaire were not members of IUCN. So what we are doing here is not only view from IUCN, but fortunately gets broader and therefore more relevant for us. One interesting thing is the expertise when it comes to natural and social sciences has not been as significantly different than I was expecting initially. So really, we got quite nice representation of all different fields, all different approaches from all ways of life. And before we move further about firstly talking about positioning of ecosystem governance, where ecosystem governance exists, I would like to implore that please use the Q&A section of the Zoom that is enabled, since we want to have your input on this, because this is still work in progress, and we would love to hear what your ideas are, what your questions are, and if you have any comments, also please feel free to share. Ecosystem governance does not exist in a vacuum. It's somehow needs to be put into perspective of all other governance theories and how it works. So for us, in our understanding, ecosystem governance is more of not an international concept, how to govern resources internationally, but more nationally or within a certain administrative level. And that was our first question in our research. Where does ecosystem governance exist? Our assumption was that the higher we go on hierarchy within one country system, regardless of political system, but administrative system, the higher there is the legislative power. But the lower we go on the hierarchy, the greater capacity for participation of all various stakeholders there is. And basically what we try to find out if ecosystem governance is perceived more as a top-down or bottom-up approach, and where on the scale it is, if it's more of a prescriptive top-down or more collaborative bottom-up. Well, in the end, we were surprised because ecosystem governance is perceived to be not a top-down nor a bottom-up approach. However, it appears to be perceived as highly normative, but as also highly participative. Therefore, ecosystem governance should be high on legislative scale, therefore somehow normative, setting boundaries and setting some set of rules that ought to be followed, but also highly participative. That's the bottom-up approach. However, 20% of our respondents also indicated, and 20% is a very significant number, indicated that ecosystem governance is basically everywhere on the scale. Therefore, ecosystem governance is quite a unique concept that basically encompasses everything there is within a hierarchy, administrative hierarchy, within one set of system. Afterwards, we asked what the components of ecosystem governance are. Basically, our premise was that ecosystem governance theory in general is comprised from principles and tools, so two categories. And over 70% of people basically agreed with this notion. And based on their answers, further answers, we were able to develop a set of both principles and tools. The principles are basically guidance for how the tools should be used, or which tools should be used. And the tools are supposed to be observing the principles, and both together are used to achieve the overall objective or goal of ecosystem governance. What the goals are, we will be discussing at the very last slide, so be patient. But now we will be moving to principles of ecosystem governance. It was an open-ended question, and we received over 100 different suggestions what the principles should be. Then what we did is to group them together, and in the end, we came up with 6 different principles of ecosystem governance. Principles of space, participation, sustainability, conservation, adaptability, and knowledge. We put them in a nice spider graph, since although some principles, for example, participation or sustainability, were mentioned very, very often by almost all the participants, we do not, and therefore scored the highest on the scale of occurrence. We do not believe that these principles, all of them, should be somehow hierarchically settled, and they're not more important than, one is not more important than other. Therefore, we put them in a spider web, emphasizing that they are all connected together, and they cannot exist one without another. Therefore, if there is a hole in the net is becoming useless. Therefore, we have to keep in mind that all the principles are necessary to be observed, and they do not have higher or lower quality than another. First, let me start with principle of space. Participation, principle of space, because ecosystem governance is somehow place-based in its nature. And now we're not talking about localized or countrywide or nationwide, but it's always concerned with some sort of living space or area that includes one or more interconnected complex systems. And what we understand it is social ecological systems. However, also needs to be mentioned that ecosystem governance is polycentric and multi-level. Therefore, there are multiplicity of stakeholders and multiplicity of power centers that are engaged in not only creating the ecosystem governance, but also maintaining it and actually achieving the overall goals. Ecosystem governance is about decentralization and devolution of power and decision-making when appropriate, because it's not appropriate to apply decentralization or devolution or certain management actions, environmental or ecosystem management actions on every level of administrative hierarchy adequately. Therefore, it's space adequacy, and that's what ecosystem governance is about. That the principles and especially tools must be adequately used where appropriate and when appropriate. One more thing regarding the principle of space, that we share space, our social systems share space with the natural system upon which we depend. Therefore, it's non-divisible. And we always have to think about ecosystem governance as governing both nature and people as a coupled system. Second principle was principle of participation. we group together several different aspects, like accountability and transparency, which we understand as prevention of arbitrariness in decision making or in individual actions, and accountability of actions of both leaders and all other stakeholders, and what is important, on all levels, again, all administrative levels. Equity and inclusion. Equity we understand as fairness in representation and recognition. Therefore, having an equity should have the inclusion quality, that no one is left behind. And that's the fairness in representation, basically. And very often mentioned term democracy, which we understand as enabling environment that is focused on the representation, on equity and inclusion as well. And we are using a guidance note of Secretary General of United Nations, that the holistic concept of democracy as a representation, that ecosystem governance needs to work with both formal and informal institutions, with majorities or minorities, both governments and civil society equally, on both national and local level. Important thing, an important fact, ecosystem governance theory in itself does not promote one way how to do things or one political system or political institutions. We promote the enabling environment, that the ecosystem governance promotes enabling environment that is enabling to achieve the goals of ecosystem governance. However, participation differs on different levels, and that's when the engagement needs to be considered, because engagement is more than participation. We all participate in this today's dialogue. However, only some of us will or are engaged. Therefore, the internalization of the issue by stakeholders that are on the bottom level, individual citizens, people need to care, people need to be engaged, people need to feel the possibility to be engaged. And if they want to be engaged, they should be heard by the higher ups. Again, ecosystem governance theory does not promote one way how to do this. However, people should be heard in equitable manner, in transparent manner, and to be allowed participation, in which way it needs to be space adequate. So you see, it's connected again to the principle of space. Next principle is principle of sustainability. Sustainability has been mentioned so many times in so many different contexts that somehow I feel that it's useless to talk about it more. However, apparently not, since our respondents were quite adamant that sustainability should be one of the leading principles of ecosystem governance. Therefore, what is sustainability? Ability of a system to continue functioning without a time limit, and maintaining functionality of the system and all of its components. And we have to talk about, again, the whole system. Therefore, both social and natural. The three pillars of sustainability, the popular concept, they are a wonderful example of this, that they are all supporting the sustainability, which is a process, not a goal. That's very important to internalize, that sustainability is not something that can be actually achieved. It can be only maintained. Therefore, it's a never-ending process, which is very closely connected to principle of adaptability. However, where is ecosystem governance when it comes to these three pillars? Social, environmental, economic. Ecosystem governance is on all of them, not only in the middle, in the cross-section of all three, but ecosystem governance is somehow reflecting and guiding all of the components, all of three pillars that are interconnected, and ecosystem governance needs to be present everywhere in order to actually help to achieve the process of sustainability. Furthermore, we have one more principle, conservation and restoration. Conservation we understand as preventing further loss of resources. And what sort of resources? Ecosystem governance doesn't work with only one definition. We take resources as very, very broad term. But also conservation in traditional sense, it's not conservation of the whole system and maintaining the status quo. It's also ecosystem governance should allow for a place for evolution and adaptation. Therefore, conservation and restoration, they're both parts of sustainability. We have to conserve what we have and restore what we lost, and not only in the ecological term. So the whole system needs to be restored when it comes to restoration. And not only to ecological integrity, to maintain the ecological integrity or to restore what was lost, but the overall quality of the particular social ecological system. And how to conserve or restore, we have to adapt, and that's the principle of adaptability. Especially on lower levels, in order to promote specific actions that are space adequate, space appropriate within the particular social ecological system, especially local administrative units needs to have a possibility, sort of leeway to do what is necessary. They need to have the capacity to respond first. Therefore, that's the principle of ecosystem governance, that again, capacity to respond and therefore adapt. And again, adaptability is a process that enables reorganization in face of natural disasters or changing climate, or a shift in consumer patterns that might threaten the stability of overall stability of the social ecological system. So it's very similar to sustainability, and that's why they are connected so closely. We need to adapt, and again, we have to adapt in not only within one particular socio-ecological system, that would be the picture on the left, but also adapt across the hierarchies, administrative hierarchies within one country. In order to create enabling environment, there is necessity for the central or federal governments issue certain laws or regulations that will allow the lower tiers of government to respond appropriately and adequately based on the local conditions. Especially in very large countries, that's very important to create this enabling environment, as the central government can never observe everything that is going on. So adaptability in the sense of ecosystem governance has two ways. The local one for the social ecological system that we are all part of, but also the hierarchical one that goes from top down, bottom up, and vice versa. There's a loop. That's why there's this number 8, basically. It's a loop that goes up and down, the exchange of information in order to reach the top, and then from top to bottom, the constant flow of information that are basis for adaptation needs to be maintained. And the flow of information is very important since it connects to the principle of knowledge, the last principle that we identify. And there are 3 basic sources that we want to mention, and that's scientific knowledge, local knowledge, and indigenous knowledge. What do these 3 have in common is that they are facts and proven ways, and not just assumptions. Basically, ecosystem governance needs to be knowledge-based in all its aspects. Decisions need to be made based on facts and not just feelings. However, the decisions must also respect the different sources of knowledge. Although local and indigenous knowledge has been discussed very often in recent years, there is still sometimes somewhere a little bit of disrespect when it comes to these sources of knowledge. And that's what ecosystem governance is not about. Ecosystem governance is about respecting all sources of knowledge, as long as they're factual. Then we were asking about different tools of ecosystem governance. We did exactly the same thing as before. We got smaller number of smaller overall number of the keywords, yet we were forced to group them up, and we grouped them up also into coincidentally into six categories, and that are relevant. Remember, tools of ecosystem governance need to support the principles, support the goals, excuse me, and observe the overall principles of ecosystem governance. Which tools should be used in which situation? Ecosystem governance does not say, it does not prescribe any particular tool for particular setting. That's what the space adequacy is. The decisions should be made, especially for the tools, should be made appropriately to the level where they are enacted or utilized, and based on the facts that are appropriate within the particular social ecological system. The participatory tools were numerous and scored the top of all dimensions, which corresponds with the significance that participation, the principle of participation, played in the part of research about principles. Therefore, participatory tools scored the highest, then monitoring and evaluation. Could it be GIS, valuation, different various assessments, or ecological thresholds? Doesn't matter if it's connected to social, economical, or natural field. Doesn't matter. Ecosystem governance establishes basically that all need to be measured in order to evaluate properly and in order to adapt if needed and how needed. Laws, regulations, and policies also scored very high, especially when grouped together, which also corresponds with the high normative nature of ecosystem governance, or how ecosystem governance is perceived, that it is to a certain extent setting the stage in a normative way, how things should be done, who are the stakeholders, what are the preferred courses of action, what are the policies that will be affecting the use of other tools. They are very important, but again, scale appropriate. That's the principle of space adequacy that we were talking about. Similar goes to incentives. There are mostly economic incentives, like different sources of research funding, fines, the polluter pays principle, or very often recently very often utilized the payments for ecosystem services, but could be governmental subsidies or tax incentives. And on what level? Again, appropriately. If the local government is able to do tax incentives, wonderful. If not, should it be allowed by higher up in the hierarchy by the central government? Ecosystem governance doesn't say, because it always also depends on the political situation in the country, political regimes, everything. However, it should be appropriately utilized in order to maximize the effect. And that will be one of the goals of ecosystem governance that we will be talking about in 2 slides. Capacity building and education and management also made it to the list. And again, there are no prescribed ways how to increase capacity building and education activities, or how exactly to manage the social ecological systems. However, again, following the principle of knowledge, it should be factual, it should be measurable, it should be appropriate according to space. This is one of the many depictions that can be done, how all these tools are related to each other, and how they are overlapping. They are all overlapping each other. Therefore, you see that finding the proper mix of tools for the appropriate utilization on various governmental levels is a must if ecosystem governance should be achieved. Finally, goals of ecosystem governance. So what are the goals? This is still work in progress, so if you feel that there should be more goals or different goals, please let us know, and we will definitely have discussion about it. So far we've identified or pre-identified 3. Goal of ecosystem governance is to support the sustainability, the process. Therefore, connected to goal 2. Goal of ecosystem governance is to achieve net gain for both society and nature, not only by conservation, but also by restoration. This is very closely connected to nature-based solutions as well. And no one should be the loser. Ecosystem governance is trying for a win-win scenario, if possible, of course, that's ideal. And goal number 3, enabling effective and efficient actions. Be it a top-down initiative or a bottom-up movement, if it's factual-based, the tools should be utilized efficiently and effectively. And in order for tools to be utilized effectively and efficiently, the appropriate levels of government need to have the enabling conditions allowed. Therefore, the national laws and policies need to or should somehow allow appropriate levels of government to effectively and efficiently solve the issues within their space. And that's it. So only short presentation, 30 minutes. And I really hope, I see we have 10 questions. Wonderful. So let's get to it.
Great. Thank you, Tomas. So what I'll do is I'll read the question, and either Tomas or myself can probably try to answer. And as Tomas said, I think it's very important to know this is still work in progress. What we hope is soon to have a document that will be at that point available for comments and to have more ideas and more understanding of what people are talking about. So, so Tomas, I will read, and you can decide. I already answered a little bit the question of Robert about this. He was saying that wondering why CBD ecosystem approach did not get a mention. And I should say that it's at the basis of what we're doing. The ecosystem approach is very clear in terms of the importance of governance and the inclusion of people in how we manage ecosystems. So that's something that is really the basis for getting ecosystem governance. The question from Stephanie was, my first question is to better understand how you intend to link with CEP's this is natural resource governance, something I cannot remember what it was, framework. It seems that to me that there are clear overlaps and opportunities for cross-fertilization.
There is, since the basis of ecosystem governance, how it was basically understood within IUCN before, basically stems from the natural resources governance framework. So it's very closely connected. However, how we moved, and the cross-fertilization is there, it is present. However, for us within CEM right now, we are not moving far away. It's still connected to the NRGF. However, it's more broad. The NRGF, as far as I understood it, is more concerned with the resources and with conservation, less with the utilization. However, I might be mistaken. It's honestly, I haven't been up to date lately. However, what we try to do is to not to overlap too much, but there will be certain overlap for sure. And the cross-fertilization, as you mentioned, it's already present since the NRGF and the environmental governance, the work on environmental governance within IUCN is basically a parent to the ecosystem governance theory.
Yeah. The next one was from Pipa, and she put a link, so I copied all the links, so we'll have them after. Well, it's not a question. I would like to share a new decision support framework developed by Fauna and Flora International that speak to the points Tomas is making. It essentially provides an ecosystem governance framework calling for an objective-based target in the landscape for all stakeholders to contribute to through the application of the mitigation hierarchy. Governance is required at multiple levels and across all sectors.
I am not familiar, I myself am not familiar with this particular project of FFI. However, as far as I understood it, it's more about the collaboration across sectors, but business and like users and providers, if I understand it correctly. And it is within the framework of, or our proposed framework of ecosystem governance, that there has to be collaboration and there has to be dialogue, and especially the internalization of the issue by both consumers and providers. However, where ecosystem governance goes further, I believe, is that we are trying to include the administrative stakeholders as well, basically governments, be it local or regional or central government. The ecosystem governance does work everywhere. And that's the main point, that all these lower levels of collaboration are very important. But what is more important for ecosystem governance itself is that these collaborations will be set as an example, and other levels of the country's hierarchy will learn about them and somehow implement them and allow them to be or use certain incentives, using different tools, how to propose them, but how to support them. However, if there is no clear understanding by all levels of governments how these collaborations work, then the efficiency and effectivity of these initiatives is only limited. However, I very much appreciate that there has been sprout of such collaborations and such projects, because this is the bottom-up way of ecosystem governance, and it will reach top, hopefully, and then further down.
Good. The next one is Barbara, and she said that I wonder if you referred and engaged the IUCN Natural Resource Governance. It's pretty much a question that we were talking about before. And she's asking also, can you give an example where devolution would not be appropriate? As I think this is core to be effective. If you don't have, I have one.
Okay, please do.
Yeah, but I'm since March, I'm part of the expert group of the advisory, the resilience. It's called the Resilience Advisory Council of the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative. So this is the group of mayors along all the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence, and this is from Canada and United States. And one thing that we discussed relatively quickly, in fact, in that group, is that and we have mayors around that realize and acknowledge that they cannot necessarily devolve to their own municipality, because the impact that they have, if, for example, they decided to put a full wall along their coast, it may impact the two neighbor cities in terms of other type of consequences and damage. So they realize that while they want to devolve, and they will have devolution of some capacities and some action at the local level, they needed to have a concerted effort around all the Great Lakes, because there will be damage. And this is one thing that nature-based solution is very adamant about, is that we have to be careful about having solutions that are not only for direct landscape that we're working, but also take into consideration the other landscapes. By the end, yes, there will be devolution, but at the beginning, right now, we're not talking about that. We're trying to find how to get solutions that will not impact the next city, for example. And in some way, I think the Danube is a very good example, because you have 6 countries that it's passing through. So if one country decides of something, and especially if it's the first one, at that point, it will impact all the others. So devolution is important, but until a certain point for how it can be implemented without causing issues to other ecosystems.
And it also depends on the political system within the country. Again, the devolution of decision-making, especially when it comes to laws or regulations, is not always possible. On one extreme, we can have the Swiss system, where every citizen can and should participate in voting on certain legislation or certain policies. And on the other hand, there are countries in the world, especially some monarchies, where people cannot participate at all. Therefore, devolution there makes no sense. Therefore, that's what we mentioned, that it always has to be appropriate to the space or the territory. Space we can also call territory in this case. So it has to be appropriate based on cultural values, based on the political systems. So devolution is not always appropriate for every, let's say, every country.
Okay, the next one was from Pipa, and this CALM framework is based on socio-ecological premises, and is designed to maintain ecosystem integrity and resilience, and to maintain ecosystem values in the landscape. So I guess it's more comment about that.
Yes.
Shaikh, thank you for this webinar. Each ecosystem has a definite space, and it has got some uniqueness. That uniqueness is its USP. IUCN has to utilize the USP and make it beneficial for the local populace while conserving that ecosystem. In India, in Rajasthan, treat peacocks as their own community members. So they protect them against difficulties. Similar bird sanctuary bring in thousands of birds and along a lot of tourists. The government protect the sanctuary. We have to find out ecosystem governance useful to both ecosystem as well as local populace. And I think that's the main point.
And he follows, actually, to make ecosystem governance more effective, IUCN has to create awareness up to grassroots level. Once awareness is there, even grassroots level can correct if mid-level governance is not following correct governance. For creating awareness, IUCN may consider all institutions, excuse me.
Yeah, including school, colleges. And in fact, this is what is important. If you want to have a very inclusive system, you have to involve everything. And I should say, school are often a very strong system for that too.
And this is exactly the internalization of the issue that we were talking about as part of the principles of participation. That's the most effective way how to actually change something. So I agree that there needs to be created awareness about what's going on. However, I'm not sure if IUCN needs to do that. We can only educate certain people, and we can definitely help, but it's up to every particular government to implement what they deem necessary and what they deem appropriate. So we are not creating a standard, I would say. What we are creating is a guidance. But if it will be implemented or not, it's up to individual government.
Okay, next one is Timothy. Knowledge is gained from data gathered through monitoring and evaluation. In ecosystem governance system, where will quality assessment of these data be implemented? Will data quality standards be established locally, nationally, or internationally? That's a good question.
Very good question. I would say that this is, for example, very appropriate when it comes to the nature-based solutions that are connected to ecosystem governance. They are somehow promoted internationally. However, it always depends on the system that needs to be managed. So that's, again, we are coming back to the top of the spider web, where the space is, because every ecosystem, natural ecosystem, is different and needs its own baseline data, of course. So there is no one cure for all illnesses. Therefore, I would say that, especially within the countries, and again, talking about the governance as government, for example, it is necessity for the country to decide, because again, in IUCN we can offer guidance, we can offer help, we can offer knowledge or training, but it's up to the country, because development, and that's one of the CBD principles, that it has to be societal choice. We cannot prescribe what should be done or should not be done. It's always the societal choice of the independent countries or independent regions, what they want to do and how to do it. So data quality standards, I don't think we can try, and let's stay in touch about this actually for the future, because this is very, very important. Thank you, Timothy. And please stay in touch, because we would love to how to put it, do more about this, because this is since we are in the very beginning of conceptualizing the overall ecosystem governance theory, there are still a lot of niches, and very important niches, that need to be developed further. So please do stay in touch. We cannot answer right now.
Yeah, and we know that there's a lot of work to be done. Barbara put here, especially regarding knowledge, when you talk about it, facts of knowledge, the challenge would be on who decides the facts.
That's connected to Timothy's question, actually. We don't know.
Yeah, and these are the nut and bolts of making it into action. And I think it's important to start thinking about that, especially in the framework of nature-based solution, because how is it going to be applied, but how is our nature-based solution will also be assessed. So that's another component too. Mike Jones, how much overlap is there between what you have attempted to define as ecosystem governance, natural resource governance framework, the foundational and ongoing work on adaptive co-management that was initiated by C4 for forest system, and Armstrong's design principle?
Again, that's connected to what Stephanie was asking. The natural resources work within IUCN has long tradition and was a parent of, or is a parent of, ecosystem governance, not only theory, but ecosystem governance terminology itself. Ecosystem governance stems from the work that has been done on natural resources governance. However, again, as I mentioned, the ecosystem, environmental or natural resources governance, the mindset there is more on the resources themselves, how to utilize resources, how to utilize resources for the people. That's while observing certain, let's say, conservation issues, which are mission of IUCN. However, what we try to do is to broaden it up a little bit, that we want not only to utilize the resources, but to gain from the resources while the resources are gaining themselves. So it's not about utilization, or management. It's about, again, internalizing the issue that we have to think about resources, not that we can govern use of resources. We have to govern our systems, socio-ecological systems, and the resources are part of it. We have to govern everything together, not separately. And that's the sectoral issue of environmental governance, that it's about governing the use of resources, not of the system that is actually using the resources. I hope I made myself clear. That's a little bit philosophical, I know, but still.
We'll work on it. Yeah, Mike, again, can you say more about the principle of space decentralization and devolution? What you said did not fit well with Marfrey's clear articulation of the difference between devolution and decentralization, and how governance systems have to be redefined to deal with scale issues. This is central to the concept of adaptive governance.
Mm-hmm. Ecosystem governance itself needs to be adaptive, of course. And again, the principles that we mentioned, we just didn't came up with them by ourselves. That's what our respondents in the survey mentioned. Therefore, how we understood and understand their responses is that there is a belief that ecosystem governance is governance of certain space, not governance of ideas, or let's say, when you look at international environmental governance or international environmental agreements, they are focused on either one resource, like for example, fishing, or biodiversity that's extreme, like CBD. So Yet?
Okay, now you're okay now. Okay, you're came back.
So it's either very sectoral or very broad. And ecosystem governance is somewhere in when it comes to decentralization or action, again, it's apparently considered to be part of ecosystem governance. However, how and at which spaces and to which extent, we do not know. It follows the overall principle that the environmental management, which is another issue, that's one of the tools, that or ecosystem management should be place-based and as low as possible. That's on the lowest hierarchy possible, presuming that people on the local level knows the best, they can manage it the best. And that's how I understand the devolution or decentralization within the principle of space. But again, it must be appropriate within the territory, depending on the political situation, depending on the structure of the government, depending on the ethnic composition of the country or of the region or system. And yeah, it's a principle or it's an idea that ecosystem governance should be localized, but how and to which extent we cannot really say because of the obvious differences between countries and territories.
Okay, the next one is, yes, I agree, Thomas. Government is fundamental and are a key stakeholder at all levels, particularly traditional and local governance, and also the enabling policies from the top. And I think it relates quite a lot to what you just said, probably.
Exactly, and that's the enabling. The enabling is a very important word because that's what ecosystem governance should be about enabling from the top, enabling actions in the bottom of the hierarchy, the administrative hierarchy. So enabling or not prescribing, but normatively saying, okay, these are the tools that we are going to use, or these are the tools that we are not going to use. Allowing the appropriate administrative sections of the country to govern their particular SES, that's part of the decentralization or devolution, appropriately based on certain principles. And those principles set within the country are creating enabling environment. That would be the ideal ecosystem governance.
But at the same time, what is the devolution can lead to the creation of new policies that can help and can go back to the top. This is where the top and down has to meet as well. Okay, Barbara was talking about, I think there's a great, it will be great to a reconnection with the natural resource governance framework to avoid reinventing the wheel. It seems that there's a misunderstanding of the concept.
Thank you. We will have a look into it, definitely. Thank you. I was not aware that there might be misunderstanding, and if yes, then I apologize, deeply apologize. But I agree that reinventing the wheel is the last thing we want. And yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Sheikh, IUCN's USP is its scientific data and fieldwork they do across the globe. With this strength, IUCN can convince governments and make them understand the danger their country are going to face in the times to come. Yeah, I would like so much that we can move on this and trying to have people to all countries should be doing a lot better when we're still having a lot of problems, I guess. Yeah. Don't know if you have anything about that, Thomas, or?
Not really. I agree. I basically agree. IUCN can have quite a significant impact since it's prestigious and sort of influential organization. But still, there needs to be people on site to actually ask for the IUCN to do something. But mostly what we can do is to promote certain set of ideals or a certain set of tools, certain set of principles. The work needs to be done by people themselves, not by the organization itself. That's why we are all members, right? to help to make it happen.
Yeah, exactly. Stephanie, while I understand that the principle you suggest are from the survey, it seems to me that it would be very useful to adapt them and validate them. And I agree, and we have discussed that before. We're still just at the analysis of the survey, so we know that it has to be done. Yeah, so yeah, to make sure also that it links to the nature resource governance framework and other things too. Yeah, that's for sure. I think there was also another question that I saw in the comments. Just a second here. Go back. Thanks, Thomas, for this interesting presentation. Could the nature-based solutions support strongly the ecosystem governance?
I would say it's the other way around, actually, that ecosystem governance has the potential to support nature-based solutions. In theory, of course. However, again, if certain region will apply nature-based solutions effectively, efficiently, everybody will be satisfied, then it might be like a spillover effect that, okay, we did it, it's connected to ecosystem governance, and then we can try implementing something similar as ecosystem governance. It's a teachable moment. So I think it's, yeah, now when I think about it, yeah, both is possible. Both options are possible, that one can support the other. And honestly, I think that they should coexist and support each other.
Yeah, and I should say that for me, when I look and I don't know if Kara is still online, but I know that even when we look at ecosystem restoration, for example, or ecological restoration, the issue of ecosystem governance is also important. Often, unfortunately, and I think that has been the work for quite a while, that we keep nature separate from human, and they have to be highly integrated. It's only through ecosystem governance that can be done in terms of ensuring that all components are respected in some way.
And we have one more question here from Barbara. Government is key, but in many cases, it's not always creating the required enabling environment. Accountability is a key principle that I missed among the principles because it is key in providing society power to ensure that government creates enabling environment. We actually have accountability there, not as the main principle, but as part of a principle of, I think it was participation. Principle of participation is actually, apparently, according to our survey, the most important one. And it encompasses several agendas, several different sub-principles, let's say, or several principal ideas. And accountability and transparency is one of them. And I completely agree with you, Barbara, that it's important. It's very important. And as we said, we understand it, the accountability and transparency, we understand it as a prevention of arbitrary decisions, and as well accountability of not only the leaders, but all other stakeholders on all the levels. So I agree with you. I agree with you. We didn't forget about it, but maybe we could emphasize it a little bit more in the future.
Yes. Mike put the question, how do you address issues of social justice if the choice of governance model is based on national governance decision rather than on principles? I'm not aware of any national government that is not inclined to accumulate power to itself rather than devolve. We live in a neoliberal world that is not concerned about equality and power sharing. Unfortunately, it's true.
I would disagree maybe a little bit. Okay, first of all, ecosystem governance doesn't really deal with social justice, since this concept is very differently understood in different countries. We are touching it, but it's not one of the core ideas that there is. Within the principle of sustainability, definitely, yes, there has to be. However, the social justice as it's very often understood in the East or the West, it's very different. So we are not really dwelling into it. However, when it comes to the second part of your question about the decentralization, or let's say not accumulating power, there are quite a few countries that are actually not necessarily devoluting, like for example in United Kingdom, that is giving back a lot of power, I feel like every year, back to regions. But when it comes to, let's say, governance of particular systems, for example, Philippines or Indonesia are devoluting are decentralizing and devoluting quite well. Japan has quite robust decentralized structure when it comes to ecosystem management and therefore ecosystem governance to a certain extent. So, and I'm mostly familiar with Asian examples. However, there are plenty of countries that are actually going through the decentralization process when it comes to environmental decision making.
It's interesting because when I look at here, especially in Ontario, Canada, the government has tendency to devolve a lot of power to municipalities. However, at the same time, these municipalities do not have the means to do anything because they're still centralized in terms of function with the province. And when we talk about environment, it's even worse because you have the provincial and the federal having both different ways to deal with issues. So for example, each province has a Species at Risk Act, but the federal government has also a Species at Risk Act. So so you can see that they can play against each other sometimes because some species are listed at the provincial level, not at the federal level, and vice versa.
Yeah, and that's exactly the thing about the space appropriateness or adequateness, that sometimes devolution, and That's we had a question before that sometimes devolution or decentralization might not be the best thing to do, since it's not adequate. It doesn't allow the functioning properly in all aspects.
Yeah. So Stephanie had another point here. The term governance means many things for different people. Those working on ecosystem are often primary biologists with limited exposure or understanding of all-encompassing terms of governance. We need to make sure that we are not muddying the waters, but instead adding clarity to the literature and providing useful tools to those implementing field projects. I completely agree. I started as a biologist. I'm a social scientist mostly now, and I should say that I completely agree that a lot of people are mixing up the terms, and also in many. And it was clear, especially in the Two Worlds Forum, a lot of people were mixing also governance and government, and that's another issue that I've seen quite often, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree. The problem was very apparent to us as well from the very beginning when we started to do literature search. It has too many meanings, and that's when we basically, I don't want to say we let people decide what they mean by it, but we are subtracting from the initial ideas what the governance, since, let me put it this way, very often scholarly literature might be a little bit separated from what people actually think and how things are perceived. So we try to combine both, to build the ecosystem governance theory on both scholarly literature, solid definitions, but also how they fit with what people perceive to be the governance. And since we are working in very interdisciplinary environment, especially here in IUCN, we try to combine both. And it's a challenge, yes. And I agree with you that muddying the waters is not a good thing. However, I feel that the waters are muddy enough already.
Okay, see any other question?
And
I agree, and I know we have discussed that before when we were discussing the principle and all that. Mike has put that there's a big difference between devolution and decentralization, and it's true. And this is what I also explained with Canada, that we have a big problem with these two definitions that are not working together. Don't know if there are other comments or questions.
I'm not sure, have we answered the Robert question about CBD's ecosystem approach?
Oh, I did the answer.
Okay, yeah, wonderful. Yeah. Thank you.
We often start, in fact, with ecosystem approach as I would say the foundation, because it has been the foundation for the ecosystem, the Commission on Ecosystem Management, since pretty much the beginning. Yeah.
Okay, any other questions, anyone, or comments?
So we can say stay tuned, because it's not finished. We are going to start working on a draft paper to be commented on. And it's nice, as Thomas was mentioning, having 75 people interested to comment and read, I think will help a lot too.
So basically, feel free, since we really want to be engaged with a lot of people, and especially you, since you, all of you who took your time to listen to us, and especially thank you to those who had questions or comments. So please do stay in touch. Feel free to write us. We will be extremely happy to continue and informally continue this dialogue some other time.
Okay. So thank you very much, really, Liette and Tom. I think it was a very good dialogue and a very good discussion. I think that this is the real real purpose of this kind of dialogues, to share views, to interact with our community. And so thank you very much. And we will be informing about our next dialogue that will be in 2 weeks, about 2 weeks, on rewilding. So we will be informing about this, the next event. So thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you.